I fell in love with punk rock as a teenager, and I've never really lost the taste, though I rarely listen to it anymore. But the past few years, one line has recurrently come back to me. I'm betting some of you know it. Maybe you thrill to it still. It's the 11 times snarled refrain that shows up at the end of the song, God Save the Queen, the Sex Pistols' anthem to fury. No future, goes the line. No future for you. I'm not alone in our hot, carbon-choked times in worrying if we'll have a future, in mourning everything and everyone that's been sacrificed in the name of progress, in worrying what life on Earth will be like in 100 years from now, in 50, in 12. 12 years from now, my oldest child will be 19, my youngest only 15. We have, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's most recent report, only 12 years in which to keep the globe from warming beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. We're currently on track for 3 degrees of warming, which would be catastrophic. When I start to feel the humid weight of despair descend, I've always, ever since I was little, gone for a walk in the woods. Now that I'm a parent, I bring my children with me, my 2 boys. I've always been at ease in the woods, in part because the woods are where humans go to make sense of uncertain times. Nearly everywhere, and for as far back as the cultural record shows, humans have looked to leaves and found meaning. The ancient Akkadian tree of life and the book of Genesis is a tree of knowledge of good and evil, Buddha's Bodhi and the Druid's oak. The Norse believed that the mythical tree Yggdrasil held the universe together, the Haudenosaunee of the northeastern United States, the white pine. Baobabs, those enormous and long-lived trees that stipple their way across sub-Saharan savannas, have come to hold generations of stories that root the humans who pass beneath their limbs in place. And it is to find our place in the world that biologists and ecologists today also turn to their own evolutionary trees of life. Trees are our histories, but today, the trees are dying. In the past 40 years, an area of rainforest the size of Europe has been cut. Lebanon's famous cedars are in decline, New England's sugar maples are retreating, and even the baobabs seem to be suffering. The trees are dying. Without them, many of the world's little live things lose their home. Without them, the earth gets hotter, drier, more sterile. Without them, we're losing our human history, which means that we're losing our imagination. The trees are dying, and I don't have any answers for you tonight, only a pair of questions for you to consider. Who are we? Where are we when all the trees come down? One day in 1846, Henry David Thoreau climbed nearly to the top of Maine's Mount Katahdin, one of the most imposing peaks in New England. And he asked those same 2 questions. Who are we? Where are we? Thoreau was the prickly author of Walden, published in 1854, one of the most famous works of American literature, and a founding document in American radical environmentalism. Walden is a book-length essay in which Thoreau recounts the 2 years he spent living beside Walden Pond in Massachusetts, in the woods, in a small cabin he built himself. Those 2 linked questions, who are we? Where are we? Are questions that Thoreau spent his entire life contemplating. He knew that the who was linked to the where, but the where during his lifetime was being remade rapidly, leaving the who adrift. Thoreau was born in 1817 and died 45 years later in 1862. He stood witness to the reign of King Cotton, the expansion of American slavery, the rapacious imperial appetite of manifest destiny, and the explosion of the Industrial Revolution in the US, an event largely driven by the growth of cotton. Quote, "Trade curses everything it handles," wrote Thoreau. He continued, "I cannot believe that our factory system is the best mode by which men may get their clothing. The principal object is not that mankind may be well and honestly clad, but unquestionably that the corporations may be enriched." Cotton production exploded during Thoreau's lifetime from 80 million bales in 1811 to well over 1 billion at the time of his death. And that fair cotton, he well knew, was planted, picked, and processed by tens of thousands of black slaves laboring in southern fields, slaves whose number nearly tripled over the course of Thoreau's life. Much of the cotton they picked and cleaned was shipped to England, textile mills in England, but some of it came to Massachusetts, where the famous Lowell mills, just downstream from his hometown of Concord, alone consumed 100,000 days of enslaved people's labor every year. The mills, of course, ran on water power, and they transformed the landscape of New England nearly beyond recognition. In Thoreau's day, 58 mills crowded the banks of his Concord River, flooding out the town's farmers. "This world is a place of business," Thoreau wrote. "I think there is nothing, not even crime, more opposed to poetry, to philosophy, aye, to life itself." Who are we? Where are we? Thoreau is famous today as the author of Walden, but in his own time and place, he was better known as the town's best property surveyor, the town's best land surveyor, a craft to which he had been devoted ever since he was a young man. One of the reasons that Thoreau spent his adult life surveying is because the job, like that of a writer, is to notice. And in the summer of 1859, Thoreau began a cartographic masterpiece, a 7-foot-long map of the Concord River, a map anchored by a tree, a willow tree growing from the river's bank, and from which he gauged the river's height frequently. Like a good, dedicated cartographer, Thoreau spent weeks noticing, sounding the river's bottom in hundreds of places over the course of 24 miles. He plunged into the town's archives, searching out old maps to consult, and he sought out older citizens whose long memories he could mine. He checked the river's height against his tree, his willow tree, often 3 times a day, and monitored its current and composition. And then, with these piles of data, he made a map. Only the map is odd. Superficially, it looks like any other map, a blank white expanse with just a few details filled in. Town lines, the river's course, a few buildings. But look closer and you'll find a riot of thousands of tiny notations, of particular comments about the river's current and its human use. Thoreau notes just downstream from the turnpike bridge, the first cottage, and just a little below, the boat place, the place where his willow once stood. Elsewhere, he marks the good swimming holes. He points out the cultural and historical geography of the river, where an old hay bridge once stood, where one might find freshwater clams, the monument to the Battle of Lexington and Concord in 1776 that launched the American Revolution. And he carefully details in scores of places what plants grow where, individual oak and ash trees, polygonum, bulrush, and many others. All that data on depth and current and where the plants and trees grew allowed Thoreau to imagine a river different from the one turning the gears of profit, imperialism, and slavery. A river impressively interconnected, non-fungible, specific, wild, free. Quote, "They who laid out the town should have made the river accessible as a common possession forever," Thoreau wrote near the end of his life in his great anti-capitalist essay, Huckleberries. And he used his surveying skill to stake a claim for the bulrush and his witnessing willow tree, for the bathers and those who hunted for freshwater clams, for himself and for all Concordians. Thoreau was often afflicted with a sense of despair when he confronted the linked social and environmental violent exploitation of his time, a violence we have inherited and amplified many times over. When he felt low, he too took to the trees to consult their rooted history, to fire his imagination, to discover possibility, and find the inspiration that he needed to begin remaking the world. That was all a very long time ago on what may as well have been a different planet, when CO2 levels stood at only 285 parts per million, rather than the approximately 405 parts per million of today. Levels that haven't been seen on Earth for at least 3 million years, and well past the 350 parts per million that scientists agree is the limit for life as humankind has known it. Perhaps the story of Thoreau and his map is irrelevant, a story from a different world, one where trees meant something other than whatever it is they mean today. But I wish to speak a word for history, for nature, for wildness and imagination, even in our violent, unfree, heating world. I'd like to tell you of something miraculous, and so to send you off into the night with an allegory rather than an answer for those two paired questions. Who are we? Where are we? I'd like to send you off with a seed for your own planting and see what you'll grow from it. In Thoreau's time, the American chestnut was almost literally everywhere, Billions of them grew across the east coast of the US. Their nuts provided food and forage, their leaves shade, their trunks lumber, but by 1950, they were, all of them, gone, victims of a fungus introduced in the early 20th century. This blight has rendered the American chestnut extinct. At least, that's what I had long thought. My family and I recently moved from the American Midwest to Massachusetts, Thoreau's home state, to an apartment in an old mill town that looks out onto a forested hill. My two sons love the woods, a place to run wild. One day, my children and I took a walk through the mixed hardwood forest, their happy voices echoing amid trunks, through red maples and shagbark hickories, sweet-smelling sassafras and smooth-skinned beech, and something else that I couldn't quite identify. Bunches of scrubby shoots, a whole grove of them, reaching like the fingers of your hand from the forest floor. Thin tendrils that never reached more than about 6 feet high. These strange trees were everywhere. I picked a leaf from one, and when we returned home, consulted my tree guide, there to discover that I held in my hands the leaf of an American chestnut. A miracle. The American chestnut was extinct, I had thought, but I was wrong. My children had led me to them, and I held a beautiful, radiant thing. A leaf from one in my hand is living proof. The chestnuts are alive. As it turns out, they resurrect themselves from the long-dead stumps of the past. This explained the clumps of pencil-thin trunks, always arranged in a rough, stump-shaped circle that I had seen. These shoots never grow very tall before blight fells them, it's true, but they always come back. They live deliberately, elegantly, requiring little, asking of us even less, other than that we pause in our great uprooted business to join them in their sylvan beauty, their enviable vitality, their stillness. The chestnuts continue to stretch their arms sunward as my children marveled at their leaves, protecting us from the sun, secure with a remembrance of the past, in the knowledge that a better world is possible. Thanks very much.